Thank you very much for this visionary presentation. As Rev rolls out, what will happen to NYSA, which has been the wholesale agent for buying power around the state? Will it just go away?
No, New York ISO runs the wholesale markets.
Right.
So they'll continue to run the wholesale markets. We're not going to totally displace generation. But what will happen is that what the New York ISO does is they set prices based on demand. And they will continue to do that. What we're hoping to do with REV is that the demand will be also reflect prices and will go down when we don't have to import. So if you think about it this way, if in the next hour there's a choice, we can increase a generator output for $100 or we can reduce consumption for $50. What would you rather do as a consumer? Would you rather have your neighbor reduce consumption because they could do it and pay them $50, or would you rather pay a generator $100? And that's the way the market should work. It's really real-time supply and demand. They'll price out the supply. What we expect our utilities to do is help customers understand how they can avoid paying and also get compensated for reducing demand.
Just have a question about, you mentioned ice storage. It's the first I'm really hearing about that. I'm familiar with CHP and battery storage, but ice storage is new.
CalMac, and there's a couple vendors, but basically what it is that people make ice at night and they melt it during the day. So rather than using electric air conditioning cooling, they use the melting ice. And I know that Bank of America building has one. I'm sure others do too.
Can you elaborate a little bit on what you guys are doing in terms of storage, since that seems to be connected to everything and really, really important, but has really lagged behind in terms of, I think, usage within the grid?
Yeah, so there's two things we're doing with respect to storage. One is we told the utilities that one of the things we want them to look at is how large-scale storage, like at substations, et cetera, can be used to facilitate the integration of renewables. Because storage could be very valuable. The other thing we're doing is calculating out at a distribution level the value of being able to reduce demand. So there's lots of values that storage can provide to the system in terms of reliability and stability that have never been valued in the grid because of the way we set our tariffs. So what we're looking at is getting our tariffs to be much more granular so that folks putting in storage could see it. The other piece is if you do things like rewarding people for being able to manage demand, you can see then combinations, and I think Glenwood Properties are looking at this, where you're looking at storage solar combinations so that people are actually putting in systems, and we think about the grid itself, it's a system of systems, and that these systems then, because you're actually valuing the ability to control, will create a market. So it's essentially by providing greater price signals, we're hoping that people will be able to make economic decisions, and that will help create that market.
If you could wait for Mike.
That question a little bit. Have you gone as granular as figuring out where you might put it and the safety? Sorry, have you gone as granular as figuring out where you might want to put it and the safety codes and restrictions around doing that?
We're not doing that. That though is something that NYSERDA would work with the cities on to start looking at what are going to be the barriers and how do we deal with codes. Like for example, real quickly, I know Verizon would love to do a lot more about fuel cells. The city fire department is worried about safety. And so these are the issues that we need to start working through and get, and get these rules out to where we want to go as well.
So we're still sort of in the discussion phases on that aspect.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, I'm not deflecting it. That is sort of outside our purview.
Understand.
But
I think Jamie
One
has the
more
mic
and
over
then-
there, so if we can go there.
Hi.
how are we on time?
Yes.
I love the example that you gave about wind turbine power peaking in the evening. I was just wondering, could you give us an example of how you could shift consumer demand, residential consumer demand, given our behavior patterns? I mean, how is that possible?
Well, it's actually quite interesting. So in New York, in Brooklyn, in the city, Con Ed has 7 different networks. They all peak at different times. Actually, Brooklyn peaks at night. Manhattan peaks during the day, so that makes Con Ed's life even more complicated than most utilities. But the idea would be is, let's say you had a customer who had an electric vehicle. So rather than charging their electric vehicle when they got home at 5 o'clock, they charged it at night. Let's say you had customers who had smart devices. So they turn on their washing machine at night, but the washing machine reads the price signal and says, well, I'll run, but I'm going to run at 3 a.m. So I'm not expecting residential customers to sit there and sort of be day trading electricity. But what we want to see is that the price to the device, and then that the device will itself respond to the price and say, we're not going to wash the clothes right now, as long as the customer doesn't care. So my dream is this, and Nest has been talking about the interconnected home, and other folks is that what'll happen is that a customer will buy electricity, and somebody will come in, a retailer, will say, well, you can pay $60 a month, but if you allow us to participate in these programs, and by the way, we'll give you, we'll lease you, or we'll put in an upgrade on your refrigerator or your washing machine, and we'll take those savings. We'll help you save that money, and at the same time, we will just, as long as you want to be green and low cost, we'll enroll you in these programs. The customer says, fine, that's good, go for it. So it's rather than customers sort of thinking about this, because I think that is going to be one of the impenetrable barriers, is how do vendors, because now we're giving them the price signal, make it easy for the customers. The thing we talk about in the electric industry and why we're trying to unleash this is we realize is that utilities and regulators are probably the worst marketers in the world, and we need to bring third parties in with the right price signals so they can start figuring out how to attract people to these type of products. In the front, sure.
So are you saying that it's no longer a zero-sum game to some degree?
I think it's the and. I mean, a whole point of REV,
non-zero, if you will.
is that energy efficiency and clean energy is actually the economic and the environmentally benign, and that's what's been missing is not the technology, because the technology's moved on. What's been missing is the right information and the right approach on how you use these resources.
So might I suggest we have a competitive field, and are we moving to include cooperation, as you say, community aggregation in the mix? We need a place to test and verify a lot of these methods and design and regulatory opportunities.
Right. So one of the things that the commission did last year, and we have 12 of them going on right now, are demonstrations. And the point of the demonstrations, because people say we don't want pilots because the industry's been piloted to death, is to how to start. So if you think about it, it's a true entrepreneurial sense. Is you make small bets, you get the program right, and then you move on. So give you an example is National Grid. One of theirs is Clifton Park. They're looking at working in a neighborhood outside of Albany, getting the customers signed off, doing an innovative rate design, providing them different services, and seeing how people respond. And once we get the program right, we can scale it. Con Ed has a one as a virtual power plant, where they're looking at aggregating a bunch of buildings using solar and storage and seeing how they could work together. And so so part of REV is to recognize that you can wait forever to get the regulations just right, or you can start doing, and it's sort of like building the airplane as you're flying it, is learn from the experience and then move on rather than wait for some sort of nirvana idea. So that's a very different approach. The utilities, I should say, in New York are totally on board with that. The other piece that we're working on, quite frankly, is information. One of the things that I sort of often note is if you can buy an airplane ticket, you can buy a house, you can buy a car, you can find a spouse, all these things online, and you can do a compare and contrast, but try to find a way to manage your electric bill, and it's hopelessly confusing. So how do we create those marketing techniques and apply them to this industry and simplify it for the consumer?
Jamie.
In the back and there's
Hi.
two. Go ahead. Yeah, sure.
So I've been studying Rev for a little while, just on my own and with some colleagues. But to me, it sounds like there's clean energy mainly for the purpose of peak demand. How do you expect that will have a greater effect on the overall clean energy aspect of the greater grid?
It's not just for peak demand. So
Okay.
one of the things, I mean, once you have the resource there, right? Solar, wind, they're very energy intense. They're energy resources, and they're just there. One of the things that when we're looking at how do we do this? The first thing to do is because there's a lot of investment, is investing where we can help reduce costs right away. And so energy efficiency is one. We absolutely know that energy efficiency is really the best thing you can do to reduce costs in the system. So how do we create markets around that? And then secondarily is how do we use demand better to reduce the peak, because it is very expensive. The thought, and for me, one of the things we're worried about all the time is impact on consumers. New York has some of the highest rates in the country. We are very concerned about that, and we're looking for ways to create that both and effect. So it's not just to reduce peak. It's just an example, to me, a very example of why managing demand is such a smart thing to do.
Hi. Are you looking to have the private sector come in and install the meters that are necessary for real-time pricing, or are you going to be doing that through the utilities?
The way so one of the questions is how to put in smart meters, right? And so the way we're looking at it now is that it should be interoperable. So the utilities would set the standards. People want the utilities to put it in. The utilities can put it in. If they want to put it in themselves, they put it in themselves. Should be very much animating a third-party market, and people would make the economic decision for them. The issue with smart meters is actually an issue that the Commission is sort of wrestling with. This is the idea of two-way meters. Clearly, if you're going to be an active consumer and you need that real-time information, whether you need a meter or not there's just debate throughout the industry. Utilities like to have the real-time information because they like to know exactly who's on, who's off, particularly for storm events, and it gives them that signal. But the question is, how much of that do you need? So we clearly need the communication infrastructure. We clearly need some level of smart metering. But the whole point of REV, frankly, is not to use utility capital if third-party capital is available and cheaper.
Last question from Russell.
Thank you, Camilla. Audrey, how do you square really the focus that's been in New York City, which is on long-term carbon emissions, with the expansion of fossil fuel-based CHP, which is going to probably last 30, 40 years? Like, how do we line those two things?
Well, I think on one hand, CHP is going to be reducing because we have a lot of diesel generation in New York, and question is going to be for New York City's perspective, what are you going to use for backup resources? And CHP is efficient, and so it is hard to put solar and other resources in the city. So I think it's going to have to be a combination. I don't know if you can square it. I don't think in my mind it'd be very difficult to get to zero emission on that basis, but maybe others can disabuse me of that.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we have to close questions, but thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you.